They said no one lived there anymore. But every Thursday, a single dad kept leaving groceries at that silent mansion on the hill, and every time a new note waited for him inside the bag. He never knew those notes would lead him to the one person who needed him most. The rain fell in silver sheets across the winding road, tapping on the windshield of Tom Sanders's old delivery van. The wipers struggled to keep up as he squinted at the GPS. Hawthorne Manor, end of Brookvale Lane. He'd driven this route a dozen times before, but tonight felt different. The mansion at the end of the lane stood like a ghost against the storm, its windows dim, its iron gate half open as if expecting him. Tom was a single dad trying to make ends meet, just another night shift. Just another delivery, until he saw the small handwritten note tucked under the grocery list. Please leave the bags by the back door. Don't knock. Thank you. Something about the neat cursive tugged at his curiosity. He didn't know it yet, but the woman behind that door was about to change both their lives forever. Tom lifted the heavy bags onto the porch, the smell of rain mixing with the scent of lavender from the garden. He noticed another note taped to the door. Thank you for your help. Your kindness is appreciated. He smiled faintly, sliding a receipt beneath it. But when he turned to leave, a soft sound caught his ear. A piano. Faint, hesitant notes drifting through the door. Lonely, broken melodies that carried pain in every chord. For reasons he couldn't explain, Tom lingered in the rain a moment longer, listening. When he returned to his van, he looked back at the mansion once more. Behind those tall windows was someone alive, but not living. And somehow, he wanted to know why. The following week, another order appeared under her name. Evelyn Hart, Hawthorne Manor. This time, a smaller note came tucked between the canned goods. You brought the right milk. Most don't care to notice. Tom chuckled at her observant tone and scribbled on his own delivery note before sealing the bag. Guess that makes two of us who pay attention. He didn't expect a reply. Yet when he returned the next day, a folded paper waited beside the empty crates. It read, You sound kind. I wasn't sure kind people still existed. For the first time in years, Evelyn wrote to someone other than herself. Tom lived in a small rented house on the edge of town with his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Every night after she fell asleep, he caught himself glancing at the letter again, the careful handwriting echoing a voice he'd never heard. He told himself it was harmless, a few notes between deliveries. But the truth was, her words lingered in him longer than they should. Meanwhile, at Hawthorne Manor, Evelyn stared at the reply, her trembling fingers brushing over the ink. 10 years. 10 years since she had seen another person face to face. But now, the thought of a man out there, ordinary, kind, human, made her heart beat in ways she'd forgotten. The next few weeks turned into quiet conversations on paper. She'd write about her garden, how she tended it from the inside through glass panes. He'd write about Lily and how she drew pictures for his van. They never spoke directly, but every message grew a little warmer, a little more daring. You make solitude sound less lonely, he wrote once. To which she answered, You make the world sound worth seeing again. For Tom, who had buried love after his wife's passing, Evelyn's words awakened something he'd thought gone. For Evelyn, locked in self-made exile after tragedy, his letters were sunlight creeping through cracks in her darkness. One morning, Tom arrived to find no note, no crates, nothing but silence. He hesitated, unsure if he should knock. Just as he turned to leave, he noticed the door ajar by an inch. Miss Hart? He called softly. No response. He pushed the door open just enough to set the bags inside. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and roses. On a nearby table sat a single photograph, a young woman in a wedding dress beside a man whose face had been torn out. Before he could think, the door slammed shut from within. He froze, heart racing. Then her voice, low, fragile, drifted through the door. Please don't come inside again." He left quietly, but her trembling voice stayed with him all night. Back home, Lily noticed his silence. "Daddy, did something bad happen?" she asked, climbing onto his lap. Tom smiled weakly. "No, sweetheart. Just thinking about a friend." Lily tilted her head. "A friend in the big house?" He laughed softly, nodding. "Yeah, something like that." The next day, he wrote a note and slid it under Evelyn's door. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you." That evening, her reply was waiting. "You didn't frighten me. I frightened myself." Beneath the words, a smudge where a teardrop had fallen. Winter rolled into the countryside like a silent beast. Snow blanketed the roads, and deliveries slowed. Tom still made the trip every Thursday, sometimes just to leave her groceries, sometimes just to know she was still there. Evelyn's notes grew longer. She wrote of her late husband, a composer who had died in a car crash just outside the estate. After that night, she never stepped past the gate again. "If I stay inside," she wrote, "the world can't take anything else from me." Tom didn't know how to respond, until Lily asked innocent words one evening gave him courage. Maybe she just needs someone to bring her cookies. And so he did. The next delivery included a small tin of homemade chocolate chip cookies tied with a pink ribbon. Underneath, his note read, "From my daughter who insists kindness should taste sweet." Days later, Evelyn's reply arrived. "Tell your daughter she's right. It does." There was something healing in that exchange. Tom imagined her sitting by the window, biting into a cookie, maybe even smiling. That image alone made his days lighter. He started to hum again while driving, something he hadn't done since before Lily was born. Then came the letter that changed everything. "Tom, may I ask you something strange? Would you leave the groceries by the front door this time? I think I'd like to see the world again, even if just from the threshold." Tom's breath caught as he read it. He arrived early that day, heart pounding, waiting beside the porch. For minutes, nothing. Then, slowly, the heavy oak door creaked open. Through the dim interior, he saw a woman, pale, graceful, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes shimmering with both fear and longing. She smiled faintly. "You're taller than I imagined." He grinned nervously. "And you're braver than you think." For the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Hart felt the sun on her face. After that day, Evelyn began stepping out onto the porch more often, always when she knew Tom would come. Sometimes she'd bring tea. Other times, they'd just stand in quiet conversation, the world beyond the gates slowly unfolding before her. One afternoon, Lily joined him on a delivery. Evelyn froze at the sight of the little girl running up the path, her laughter echoing through the courtyard. "You have a beautiful garden," Lily said brightly. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I used to think so," she whispered. In that moment, Tom saw something shift inside her, the first fragile spark of healing. And when they left, Evelyn lingered by the gate, watching until the van disappeared into the golden dusk. Spring came quietly that year. The frost melted from the hedgerows, and soft sunlight spilled across Hawthorne Manor's ivy walls. Tom noticed how Evelyn had started leaving her windows open, the lace curtains swaying gently in the breeze. "You're letting the world back in," he told her once, smiling. She looked down, shyly touching the doorframe. "Maybe the world isn't as cruel as I remembered," she said softly. Inside, the grand piano that had once stayed silent now played again, slow, uncertain tunes that grew stronger every week. To Tom, it sounded like hope, rediscovering its rhythm. One afternoon, Tom arrived later than usual. Lily had been sick, and he was exhausted from a sleepless night. When Evelyn saw him, she noticed the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You look worn out," she said gently. He laughed it off, but she insisted on making him tea. It was the first time he stepped beyond the doorway, just into the entry hall, where time itself seemed frozen. Dust shimmered in the sunlight. A portrait hung above the staircase, Evelyn and her husband smiling. She caught him staring. "He was my whole world," she murmured. Tom nodded quietly. Then he must have been lucky to be loved like that. Their eyes met, and in that fragile silence, something unspoken passed between them. Their friendship deepened in the smallest, most ordinary ways. She'd send him home with herbs from her window garden, and he'd bring Lily's drawings to pin on her kitchen board. Once, he fixed the broken hinge on her back door. Another time, she taught him how to make scones the proper English way. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness now carried traces of life again. Laughter, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of footsteps. Yet every time Tom turned to leave, he caught a flicker of fear in her eyes, as if the world outside still waited to steal her peace away. Then came the storm. A violent wind swept through the countryside, toppling trees and cutting power across the town. Tom's van stalled halfway up the lane, so he trudged through the rain to deliver her order on foot. But when he reached the manor, he found the gate torn from its hinges and the front door wide open. "Evelyn!" he shouted, rushing in. The house was dark, silent except for the howl of the wind. He found her in the sitting room, curled in a corner, shaking. "I thought it was happening again," she whispered. He knelt beside her. "It's just a storm," he said gently. "You're safe now?" That night, he stayed until dawn, keeping a candle lit by her side. When morning came, she looked at him differently, like someone who had just realized what love still meant. Days turned to weeks. With every visit, she stepped a little farther from the door, first onto the path, then to the mailbox, then across the garden. Each step was a quiet victory. One afternoon, Tom brought her to the edge of the gate. "Go on," he urged softly. She hesitated, her hand trembling. "I can't," she said. "You can," he whispered. "Just one step." And she did. For the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Hart stood outside her gates. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "It feels like breathing after holding my breath too long." Tom smiled, eyes glistening. "Then let's never go back to holding it again." Lily began visiting often, her presence filling the mansion with warmth. She called Evelyn Miss Eve and loved her stories about the manor's history. Together they baked cookies, played piano, and even planted flowers in the old greenhouse. Evelyn laughed for the first time in a decade, a bright, airy sound that startled even her. Watching them together, Tom realized something. His daughter wasn't just helping Evelyn heal. Evelyn was giving Lily something too, the soft maternal care she had missed all these years since her mother's passing. But not everyone understood. The townspeople whispered about the reclusive woman and the delivery man spending time together. When his boss caught wind, Tom was warned. "You're crossing professional lines, mate. Deliver, don't get involved." He considered quitting, but the thought of Evelyn retreating back into darkness stopped him. That evening, he told her the truth. She listened silently, her eyes downcast. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your job," she said quietly. "You won't," he replied. "I'd rather lose work than lose what we've built." Her breath caught, her heart racing at the conviction in his voice. "Tom," she whispered, "you've already given me back my life." Summer bloomed across the valley. The mansion's once dead gardens now thrived, the roses bursting in color. Tom often spent his evenings there after work, sitting with Evelyn on the front steps, watching the sun dip behind the hills. One night, she turned to him and asked, "Do you ever miss her?" He knew who she meant. "Every day," he said, "but missing her doesn't mean I can't live again." She smiled sadly. "I think that's what I'm learning too." In the fading light, they shared a quiet moment of understanding. Two broken souls, no longer defined by loss, but by the courage to start again. When autumn came, Evelyn surprised him with something unexpected, an invitation. "Tomorrow," the note read, "I'm going into town. Would you walk with me?" His heart leapt. The next morning, she stood at the gate in a long coat and scarf, her hands trembling but her eyes determined. Together they walked down the lane, the villagers watching in awe. For some, it was like seeing a ghost return to life. At the cafe, she sipped tea by the window, sunlight glinting in her hair. "It feels different," she said softly. "Being part of the world again." Tom smiled. "The world's better with you in it." Months passed. Their friendship deepened into something gentle, steadfast, and real. One crisp evening, Tom brought Evelyn and Lily to the town's Christmas fair. Snowflakes danced under the lights and carols played in the distance. Evelyn watched Lily twirl with joy and tears glistened in her eyes. "You've given her something I couldn't," Tom whispered. She shook her head. "No, Tom. You gave me a reason to live again." Then softly she added, "And perhaps to love again." He looked at her, the words hanging in the air between them. In that quiet, snow-dusted moment, he took her hand, and she didn't pull away. A year later, the mansion no longer stood in silence. Laughter filled its halls. The piano played bright living melodies. Evelyn had opened a small art retreat for widows and single parents, helping others rediscover hope. Tom still delivered groceries, though now it was mostly to help the community center they built together. On the porch, as evening light painted the fields gold, Evelyn watched Lily chase butterflies through the garden. Tom came up behind her, wrapping his arm gently around her shoulders. "Hard to believe you once said you'd never leave this house," he teased. She smiled, leaning into him. "Hard to believe I ever lived without you." The same piano notes that had once sounded lonely now carried joy, the melody of two hearts that had finally found home. Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with a single act of kindness, a delivery left at the door, a note tucked between groceries, or a hand held in silence. In helping someone else step into the light, you may just find your own way back there too.